Hey everyone, good to see you. We're just gonna hang out here for a couple more folks. Hopefully we're trickling in. Took a little break after Brian's presentation and we'll get going. Sound good? Oops. As I just said, I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes here just to see if anybody else comes in, and then we will definitely get going. Thanks, Kat, for the hearts. That's just great. It was a really good session. I learned a ton from Brian, as I always do. It's good to see you back for this session and helping us round out the Leader Summit. Hey, Dion, I'm just going to ask you, are you keeping up on the waiting room? We only have 3 people on the call, so maybe I should just get started. I know it's going to be recorded.
Oh,
and
yeah, I got an eye on the people that are popping in the waiting room. We're up to 10 folks, so
oh, great.
Yep, so we're good to go whenever you feel ready.
Okay, I'll give it another minute and then we'll start it off. So thanks y'all for being here. Super excited to have this opportunity and round out the 2023 Winters Leader Summit. So yeah, I'm just watching the clock tick till 11:05, and then I'm gonna start chatting with y'all. That sounds good. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for being part of the Leader Summit, the Winters Leader Summit for 2023. It's been a really interesting few days. And I'm Patricia Hennessy. I'm the development manager for Slow Food USA. I'm relatively new to the team. I joined June 1st. And I have to say, personally, it has just been such an incredible opportunity. I've missed some of the sessions to attend live, but I've been able to go back and look at the YouTube videos. All of these will be available and recorded. So if you miss something, I have a tendency to talk fast. There'll be an opportunity to go back and listen to the conversations that we've had throughout this weekend. But it's really good to be here. There's some of you I've met, chatted with, know a little bit about. Many of you don't, and I think that's in part because I'm still new to this organization, or relatively new to this organization. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I've been in the fundraising world for over 20 years, kind of cut my teeth in public health and early childhood education, and then In 2016, I really decided that, food was my thing. And I think in part because of all the work that I've done across the board, there's always been a nutritional or food type component to my work. And somebody said it in the last session with Brian, but we all eat. And I think food is something that brings us all together at a table where we can break bread and, celebrate who we are and what we bring. So, and I just want to say that I want all of you to know that I am a resource to you. And I truly hope that our conversation today generates a ton of ideas and really reinforces the amazing work that you are already doing on the front lines of bringing good, clean, and fair food to all. I'm going to encourage you to use the chat to get to know each other. Just let us know who's on the call. Share who you are, your pronouns, where you're located, contact information, or anything else that you think would be of benefit to this group that that's here today to talk about fundraising versus fundraising. I'm sitting in Bremerton, Washington. It's a beautiful sunny day, and it's kind of a nice midwinter treat to see all the sunshine. Dion is hanging around. He's going to be my tech expert. Thank you, Dion. I really appreciate you more than you know. He's going to kind of just keep monitoring the situation, the chat. He may interrupt me if somebody posts a question, and I encourage you to just be as interactive as possible throughout this session. I am going to have some time for Q&A and open up the mic and let you all just kind of think about things, answer questions, share ideas. So let's get started. If I can advance, hey, Dion, why is my screen not advancing?
You can probably click the screen itself, like click down.
There we go.
There it is.
There we go. Okay, so what we're talking about is, this is a session on fundraising and development, but really I kind of want to frame it around fundraising and how do you build community to achieve your fundraising goals. So the buckets that we're going to be talking about is funding. What are the types of funding? Where do you find the resources that you as a Slow Food chapter, as a community need? I'm going to give you a few kind of thoughts around the difference between fundraising and fundraising. And the reason I'm doing this is that I think that using the term fundraising, it's a little, kind of, I don't know, kitschy. But it really is, I think it really speaks to the values of the Slow Food mission better than fundraising in some respects. Communications, I'm going to open it up. I really want to kind of talk with all of you about your work. The genius is in the room. That's what I think. And you all have been out there and doing all kinds of wonderful work around fundraising. And then just talk about readiness. Like if you're going to ask for funding, if you're going to ask somebody to be involved in your organization, what are some of the considerations that you should think about? How do you position your team, your leadership team for readiness? We'll talk about the stories that you need to tell. What should you be asking of yourself before you ask someone else for them to be involved? And then we're going to talk about just kind of what donors want. I'll go over some additional resources that I keep in my library that are always at the ready, that are, very dog-eared books and well-visited websites. And then open it up for question and answers again and wrap up the Leader Summit. So fundraising. As I said, I've been in this realm, in this industry for well over 20 years. And at times I do feel it's daunting. It's definitely not a four-letter word, but it seemingly can be. It's complex for sure. For leaders and for folks that are in, running a nonprofit organization, we need to fundraise to keep the lights on, the staff paid, programs viable. And it really is. It is necessary. We have to raise funds in order to fulfill our mission. I mean, when you think about fundraising, we tie it back to philanthropy, and it really is, it's the desire to promote welfare, to help people. It's about bringing in money from a person of wealth or a corporation or a foundation and putting it towards a good cause. And, that's great. But I also feel, and this again, this is me speaking from experience, and you'll see a little bit more in this presentation. Philanthropy, in my opinion, can also be very extractive. It's transactional and it's competitive. And, if you look at the history of fundraising and how it started, Dan from our staff has some great resources she and I have talked about, but it really is, it's a money helps things, but fundraising and dollars are not the only thing that you can throw at the great work that we're doing to make it move forward. So for these purposes and our purposes as a slow food network, I want to look at fundraising in a different kind of perspective, in a different light, through a different lens. I mean, really, it's about getting people to invest in their own value systems. And this is, I heard this from Sonia Campion many years ago, and I thought, wow, this really works, because fundraising is about building relationships, it's telling stories, it's getting to know each other, it's becoming friends and partners and allies. So kind of moving into like funding, where do you find it? I mean, there are a lot of sources of funding out there. There's membership. Of course, Slow Food USA, your chapters, we're a membership-driven organization. As you all know, we host a membership drive in September. I just want to speak a little bit about this. All of our members, whether it's individual members, chapter members, this effort, this initiative has occurred in September, and our membership is really important. It's a very fundamental base to the work that we do. We just heard that, some of the conversations and how we communicate with folks. We heard about that in our last session with Brian. But one thing I do want to mention, as leaders, we're going to do the membership drive, the general membership drive in September, but we're going to do the small business supporter membership drive in May. And the idea here is to develop a strategy to kind of get the small business supporters engaged with you at a more local level in September, to really be that voice of why they support slow food, and really help kind of spread the love and spread the word to their constituent and consumer base. Another source of funding, direct mail appeals. Brian is on this call, and he's helped with a lot of the crafting of the direct mail appeal that we just did at the end of the year. If you have any questions for him, I'm just going to give him a heads up that you might be asked questions, Brian. But one of the resources that I'm going to share is just kind of what makes a good direct mail appeal. Yesterday, you heard from Mara, I believe it was yesterday. I listened to the YouTube video. She and her team did a brilliant job talking about, how to set the table for a successful event. And I'm not really going to go in depth here, because that is an amazing resource in and of itself. And if you didn't attend that session, I encourage you to watch the video, because it really was, there was a lot there. It's very rich, and I think it really will help you plan with your events. Sponsorships. This is another source of revenue. It can be associated with an event, but it doesn't have to be. You can have sponsors for programs as well. And this could be a local business, it could be a bank, a partner nonprofit. In the context of a chapter or even a program, these entities, a lot of them, and we'll talk about this more, sometimes there's a less formal application process. So we do have them to walk through kind of how we make a pitch, and hopefully that'll be a resource to you as well. Another source of funding is earned income. That was touched on a little bit in the last session. I mean, Are you working with Bonfire? Are you selling mugs or asking for a donation at a certain level with a special coffee cup from like Clean Canteen or Mirror or what was it, Yeti? I mean, they're great. It's not going to generate a lot of revenue. And I just, my kind of sort of thought and suggestion for you is make it special and make it exclusive to make it really beneficial. And then there's grants, as I mentioned, and I just gave away my last thing. Grants are like, I could do a workshop, an all-day workshop on this. I mean, they're all shapes, all sizes. There's private, there's foundations, there's corporate, there's federal. But I just want to call it out again, grants are another source of revenue. And then you probably saw this, but anybody know the other source of revenue that I was going to bring to your attention? And again, this is the reason I'm calling this out, is because I really think it speaks to the value-based kind of decision-making that we make here at Slow Food. I mean, anyone want to throw something in the chat or come off your mic and say what the other source?
Lily just mentioned that should love a specific workshop specific to grants, and that is seconded and thirded by Amy and Kat as well. So a lot of energy for grant workshops.
I will be happy to do that, and I will put that on my Airtable calendar and work plan. Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit more of some of the resources that are immediately available to you to find grant funding and that are free. So, but the last source of funding, and I really want to again is time. I mean, many of you have probably heard the notion of time, talent, and treasure. Time is something that it's a resource that, you know, we can't make more of, and it really is a donation. And I really think it levels the playing field in many respects, especially when you have a volunteer. We're a membership-driven network. We're also a volunteer-driven network. So really valuing somebody's time that they bring to your organization or effort. And it can absolutely, you know, you can quantify that with a dollar value for sure. And I encourage you to really think about that when you're, you know, if you're going after grant funding, to be able to say, you know, I have a person that's volunteering, an expert, you know, and this is what they're giving to our organization. In some of my past work, I had a really wonderful, well-known, well-renowned architect, and he was developing a master plan for a capital campaign that I was involved in. And we really were able to say, you know, this is what he is bringing to the table. And we talked to numerous funders and said, you know, the time and the value of his work was well over, you know, $75,000. And the funders listened to that and kind of said, oh, this counts as a match. But it was time and it was his talent. So I just want to call that out. Before I continue to move on, I mean, any quick, open up the mic, anybody have any quick questions or comments? Or should I just keep on? Okay. So, as I said, there's a lot of funding out there, and it is closer than you might think. And when you stop and think like, oh, I've got a program, or I've got an event, or I've got this, where do I start? I mean, it can be really overwhelming, because we all know that, you know, funding kind of, you know, greases the skids, as my dad would say. It really makes things move forward. It helps to keep the lights on. It pays the staff. It keeps programs viable. But it's just kind of like, where do I start? And I think I ask this question of myself a lot as a fundraiser. Where do I start? Because again, I know there's a lot of funding out there. And and the reason I have this graphic over here with the snail in the middle is I really like to think about concentric circles. So the first question is like, who are my personal champions? Who would really like to know about this work? I mean, over my career, there are folks that I can go to that I can say, hey, you know, I'm working on this project, or I'm with this organization. Would you be interested? So really think about who are those that are closest to you, especially at the chapter level. I mean, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got neighbors. Just that's when I say, who are your personal champions who really appreciate what you're doing in the world and appreciate you as a human being? Again, you know, this is kind of maybe the next ring out, like who loves your work and wants to know more about it, that you haven't had the opportunity to kind of sit down, grab a cup of coffee and tell your story about what you're doing or ask advice of. Next one, who else should know more about this work? What are you doing? What are we doing in you know, your particular slow food chapter? These are the folks that you think about, God, they should really know what we're doing, but you haven't gotten to yet. Now you need to start to think about, okay, well, you kind of know that person because you run into them all the time at the grocery store, but who are their friends and fans? This is sort of one of the things that I talk about in, you know, in fundraising and in my experiences, that never leave a conversation without asking who else should know about what we're doing. I mean, this is how you start to build out those concentric rings. Is there a local business that's doing really cool stuff? Who do they support? I mean, I think this kind of goes back to, you know, the small business supporter build out and membership drive that we're thinking about is, you know, who is doing cool stuff? They have a story to tell. They support slow food. I mean, these are your like-minded kind of individuals and business leaders in your community. Chamber of Commerce. I think every community has a Chamber of Commerce, and they have a mission, but part of their mission is to really support local work, grassroots work that's happening in their community. That's part of the overarching mission of a local Chamber of Commerce. So get to know that leadership. Same thing with banks. Local banks, small banks, not like Chase, not Bank of America, but your local, your credit unions. These are tremendous resources for you. And they all have boards, and they also have giving. They have to reinvest in their communities. So get to know your local banks and make friends with them. Bank with them. I encourage you to bank with them. That always helps too. And then the last question, when I think about where do I start to look for funding resources, is how many times, when was the last time you went to your local library? I'm a big library supporter. I think they're great. They're a tremendous resource. They're free. And yeah, I just think about your local library. So talked a little bit about the questions, like where do I get started? Who do I talk to? My friends, how do we start to build out those concentric rings? So going to the libraries, a lot of libraries, whether they're public or university libraries, they have a bunch of national databases. There are many, because we all go to a library to find information. And these are just a couple that I really like and have used throughout my career. Candid Learning, it's maybe not like a location to find funding, but it's totally free anywhere. You can use it from your desktop. You don't have to go to the library, but it's a great resource in terms of exploring different trainings and learning experiences. It really is truly a community around philanthropic ideas and efforts and work that folks are doing. And as I said, I mean, it's kind of overwhelming, but it's free. And that's a good thing. Data Axle is another database that I use quite a bit. And this is a really fun one. It used to be Reference USA, but it's a way that you can kind of explore, you know, consumer data, that you can do zip code searches, you can do funding, or you can do zip code searches, telephone searches. It's the sky's the limit almost, and you can even get down to sort of searches around income brackets, household income. So it's a really great way to kind of build a database of potential donors or partners, what might have you. It's also a great way to, and I say identify competitors. It's like, who else is doing the work that you're doing? And when I say identify competitors, maybe you're kind of thinking, gosh, who are the like-minded organizations, businesses in my community? Data Axle can help you do this. And what I have found is that you do need a library card to do this. So again, another plug for accessing your local library. And then finally, this is one of my all-time favorites, Foundation Directory Online. They're constantly growing their database, but there are, if you can get it on a very limited basis. I don't think it costs a lot of money, but if your library has it, it's free, and it's probably the most expansive, most like, I don't know, the most robust version of this. And what's great about this is that if your library does have Foundation Directory Online, in order to get Foundation Directory Online, the librarians needed to have a special level of training. So they're very well versed on how to use this database, the resources that are in it. And again, all you need is a library card and know where it is located. And then, last but not least, it's not a national database, but I think they need to be considered as a national treasure. And those are your reference librarians. Again, I'm a big proponent of libraries as a resource to help you find the funding, the resources that you need for your organization. In my particular case, my reference librarian, who I go to all the time, her name is Peggy Branneman. She's been with the library for over 37 years. I've been talking to her for over 20 years. And, I find myself going back to the reference librarians. I mean, Peggy's the one that's closest to me. I mean, there's many in the Kitsap Regional Library system, but I just find it really amazing that if I have a question, and I usually do, I'm always finding questions around fundraising, or what is this, or this organization has changed, or I thought this foundation funded this. Peggy for me is a really, really great resource. The other thing that just surprises me the most about Peggy is if I'm just scratching my head and I'm trying to find the right person within an organization, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a corporate entity, whether it's a small business, she can help me really find who that right person is. And so just, I'm giving a plug for those reference librarians. They're your friend. If they're not your friend, make them your friend. Okay, any questions at this point? Any thoughts? Because I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the difference between fundraising and fundraising. Anything in the chat, Dion?
Nothing quite in the chat. But I think we are ready to switch over to the next topic. Great.
All right. So, as I mentioned, this is a conversation around fundraising, raising funds, bringing in resources to your work. But I really do see a difference between fundraising and fundraising. And just to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive, when I think of fundraising, and again, this is a personal perspective, I think many of you may agree with this through experience, but it really sometimes feels very top down. You in order to get a grant, for example, you have to apply, and there's a very delineated process. A lot of the funding that comes through, philanthropic channels it's mission driven, and it's very specific. You apply for a grant with such and such an organization because this is what they want to fund. This is what they do. This is the allocations that they make. Here is our application process. So to me, it kind of feels like it's a lot of handouts and a lot of hand ups. We do talk about in our work and in our industry is that, it's one thing to give somebody a handout, like, here's a food box versus a handout or a hand up, which is, why do you need that food box in the first place? Really trying to get at the root cause of the issues. But it's also very donor centric, and philanthropy historically has been, what is it, what does the donor believe the cause is? It's not kind of that upswelling of like, hey, let's really look at true community need. And I think it also sets a false sense of standards. When I think about the grants that I've applied for in my, tenure as a fundraising professional, it's like, okay, I'm going to serve this population, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. It's limited to that. I mean, that's how we, demonstrate success to a funder. It's like, yes, you funded me for this, and here's what I achieved. It's kind of this, under promise and over deliver kind of mentality. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that, but it's just something that I think if we're really a values driven organization and we're really trying to make those value choices, these are some of the things that we need to think about. And again, that also speaks to how sometimes in a very traditional sense, fundraising can uphold inequities, that it's not what's good for one is good for all. It's more like, no, this is good for this particular organization or this particular population. And then I really think that sometimes it flattens resistance through competition. Homelessness is one that is a very big issue in the region where I live. And it's always so shocking to me of, how competitive the funding is to get dollars to really help try to mitigate this issue. So that was a lot of my own personal opinion and kind of philosophy and thinking. Fundraising, on the other hand, it's very community centric. When you think about this, what drives fundraising, in my opinion, again, it's kind of a cliche term, but it's really about relationships and lived experience that define the need. What is happening really, let's get everybody's voice at the table. Let's talk about this. I do have a link on my additional resources page to community-centric fundraising. It's a tremendous website. It's a lot of really good resources. And again, really helping all of us think more collectively and community-based around, what are we raising money for and how is it going to benefit? I think fundraising, it's all missions are interrelated. Nobody's mission is more important than yours. It's like somebody said on the last call, everybody eats. I mean, that's what, that is what is so amazing and so important about food, is like, how do we create good, clean, fair food for all? Because we are all eating, and we want to make our foodways better and stronger. And again, all elements, they're everybody, whether we're working on animal welfare, if we're working on the environment, I mean, everything strengthens the community and is equal values. And then I think, the other piece to this too is that nonprofit, to take away this competitiveness, we're generous with each other and we're mutually supportive. I mean, I don't want to steal from slow fish, but literally a rising tide floats all boats. And then the work again around fundraising is holistic versus segmented. I mean, we know that there's a ripple effect. I spoke to you a little bit about time is equally as valuable as money. And then really, we look at donors as partners, that they're part of the conversation, that it's okay to push back. And I'll talk about this in the next couple slides, but really to, get into and engage in a dialogue with the donors. What is realistic? What is your, if you invest in my organization, what is it that you want to achieve? What is it that we can achieve? And being really realistic and really forthright with that information. So this definitely want all of you to go off mic, get in the chat, post what you've got. Dion's going to help me read some of the chat stuff, but I would like to just hear kind of your what and why. And because I really do think that, we learn from each other. All of you are doing amazing work. And I think that we've all had, the moments of just like, oh, I did it, or, oh, I wish I didn't do it. So what I would like for you to do, if we need to take a break, let's see, it's 35 after, 34 after, we can take a couple minutes if you want, so you can kind of think about these questions, but I would really like for you all to come back and have a conversation around just, and it doesn't have to be these questions, but what has been your experience? Because I'm sure you've got a lot to share. And again, I want this to be a really open source opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. So, around fundraising, what has worked? What do you want to try? What are you thinking about doing and you haven't had the guts, or you're just not sure how to start? What will you never do again? I mean, I think learning from our mistakes is such a powerful opportunity to learn from each other. And then, have you had an aha moment? It doesn't have to be like recent, it can be in the past. And then honestly, you guys are doing great work out there. And I would love to hear if there's anything that you want to brag about that we can, that we can glean from and take to the next level, make sure that we document and build off of your successes. So what I will say is we're about 35 minutes into this. Maybe take a couple minutes, think about this, and how about we come back at 20 minutes at the 8 before the hour at 11:40. Does that sound good? So if you need to go off camera, take a break, please do so. But I'll call you back over at 40 after. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Dion, anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat yet, so we will come back in just possibly a couple minutes at 40 after the hour.
Sound good? Okay. Can't wait to hear your stories. Okay, folks ready to come back and kind of share some of this, the what's and the whys?
Yeah, if you have any thoughts or contributions, you can raise your hand in the chat and we'll make sure we get to you. But in terms of text, Angie from Slow Food North Louisiana writes, Slow Food North Louisiana is fairly good at fundraising through events. We have a wide variety of events, both in terms of content and ticket price. Some are free. And we do this to avoid exclusion, but we have to reconcile the fact that our largest fundraiser is a high ticketed farm dinner. I'd love to get better at securing sponsorships so we can keep ticket prices manageable. Thank you, Angie, for that. Really thoughtful, and would love to hear Patricia's thoughts on gaining sponsorships in order to keep these ticket prices a bit more feasible and manageable too.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, I love the fact that, Angie, you've got quite a few, you recognize that some events can be exclusive. That is great. And I think that that's, what I would say to you is, around kind of the sponsorship aspect. I think that is a really powerful, that is something that you should take to sponsors. It's like, the reason we need sponsors is we want to be as inclusive as possible. We do a lot of different events. One thing that we can share with you is, I think it was touched on with what's the program, is the different kind of the menus that, like, for instance, Slow Fish has. But I think that, if you're really trying to engage sponsors, I think that's a really compelling argument and a really great part of the conversation to say, this is why we're looking for sponsorships, because we want to make these events available to everybody. And here's why. Hopefully that answers your question. Anything else in the chat?
Yeah, so Joanna Hopma writes that we learned from Denver, participated in 3 revenue shares with Snail of Approval winners, 24 Carat Bistro served a dish with pastificio pasta, and they had a statement about slow food on their menus, and we earned $4 for each dish ordered.
That's awesome. That's a really great partnership. And it was with a restaurant, small business supporter.
Yeah, I could talk to it. This is Jody.
Yeah, definitely.
I thank you. Slow Food Denver is always just so amazing to us. I just can't thank them enough. But we reached out to 24 Carat Bistro. We had a board meeting there, and we just are so in line. And we said, "Do you want to serve a dish?" And then we connected them with Pastificio, brought some free pasta to them from them, and then they tried different. They made it seasonal, so they started in summer, and it was very summery pasta, and then towards the fall, it became like a butternut squash cheesy pasta. It was delicious, and we made like $1,500 from that revenue share. And then we did the same thing with Dryland Distillers, where we went to some local smaller farms and got some. At first, we started with gooseberries, but they were gone like that. So it was a gooseberry gimlet, which was amazing, and then we transferred it to a cucumber gimlet, which is very similar. I'm sorry, it's very seasonal. And we also made about $1,500 on that one too. Because you never know. I mean, it was an ask. The worst they can say is no.
Exactly. And I love, this is one thing, it is that revenue share. I mean, it's just a win-win situation for you, for the business as well. And again, I think that alignment, it helps the business show that they're really behind the slow food values, mission, and vision. So kudos, good on you. Shirley, it looks like you had a comment or a question.
Both, I guess. I wanted to ask you, fundraising is a hard job. It's not a job that everybody in the group rushes to volunteer for. So apparently it takes some skill and somebody that really wants to do that. But if you were to write a job description, what kind of skills would you look for? What kind of what would you look for in that person?
That is an excellent question. And I'm going to answer it. And I'm also going to kind of put a pin in that because we are going to talk about those skill sets and how who's doing the fundraising and how do you really put those people, those individuals into positions of success. But I think, one of the things that I will say is like, first, yes, thank you. It is a hard job. And it is kind of, it's, there's a discomfort zone, for lack of a better, a better term. But I think, the biggest skill set is that you want to look for is you want somebody that's really, it's a people person kind of job. I think extroverts are better fundraisers than introverts. I'll leave it at that, but I am going to talk about kind of the skill sets and again, how do you position your leadership team to be successful and comfortable in doing what is being asked of them? Because fundraising is really the role of the leadership of an organization. So does that help? So more to come.
Yes.
And Amy from Slow Food, Lake Tahoe, a little story is that recently we became a beneficiary of a larger, well-attended local event. We received the funds from the raffle and alcohol sales in exchange for providing the volunteers to run the event once every year. It allowed us to get access to a higher level of funding for the next 2 years and be exposed to a new audience who didn't already know about us. At the event, we had a video introduction of our chapter and the work we do. After the event, we received an extra $10K from an individual who learned about us at the event and wanted to support our cause. The exposure to individuals who we may otherwise not reach was very valuable, which is a great story. Jody's asking what type of event was this? Amy, if you'd like to dive into that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so this particular event was actually a storytelling event for the outdoor extreme athlete community. So it's like a photo storytelling type of event, and they do it both live and then they broadcast it out as well. So very different from a slow food event, but we were able to kind of bring in some good, clean, fair food aspects to the event. So I definitely encourage you to think outside of the food box.
For sure. That is definitely a brag. Congratulations to you and your chapter. I think that's really great. And I think you bring up a really valid point is, it's that values alignment. We've talked about it so much throughout this Leader Summit. I mean, there's so many different ways you can go about that. And I think sometimes in your fundraising efforts is who are the unsuspecting partners? I mean, who is really, where's the mutual beneficial kind of connection? Yeah. So yay, good for you. That sounds awesome. That sounds totally awesome.
Do you have time for one more from Chelsea?
Sure, go for it.
So Chelsea Road Phoenix is going to route a snail of approval, hopefully before the end of the year. We'll use these partnerships to also secure various tiered discounts for board members, community members, etc. Our last few events have only been very board member heavy, and I'm trying to break away from the traditional ways of events, communication, so that we can introduce slow food to others who may not know about us, but it's seeming difficult to introduce these new ideas. And looking forward to hopefully using fundraising as a new pitch to the team.
Yeah, no, I think this goes back to the conversation or the question earlier about, sponsorships. I think, we're about good, clean, fair and fair food for all. And I think this is, as fundraisers, I think it's really important as we look at kind of that fundraising framework to go to those sponsors and say, yeah, maybe you've supported, these are the events, there's some sort of alignment, like, oh, this is going to be a good fit for me, but really helping educate the donor as to why this is important and help them understand there's different ways that they can get involved, but at the same time meet and fulfill their own, their own value systems. So I think, that equity piece is huge. It's absolutely huge. Just making sure that, how do we bring, literally, no table is too small. I mean, just let's figure out a way that we just add more seats. I mean, we can all fit. And I think that is, as a fundraiser, as somebody in your organization that is doing that work, I think that is probably the most, for me, it's having those conversations to say, yes, I would really like for you to sponsor, these are the recognition that you will get. However, I mean, let's think outside the box. Let's think outside the food box. Let's be innovative together. And, it's that way, it's a two-way street, and that's how you build relationships and build friends. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so Shirley, to your question, I think one of the things, in my travels as a fundraiser, I've been an executive director. I've also been the director of development. I'm in the development management position here at Slow Food USA. And what I will say to you is that fundraising is definitely a team sport. I mean, if you're an executive director, it is not necessarily your responsibility to raise all the money. You're the conductor, but you have a team around you that can really help build the story, build the effort, engage donors, engage partners. And so what I would say is that, in the fundraising efforts that you have within your organization, don't just hand it off to one person. Have somebody that's, inspired. I just, again, with the leadership summit over the last few days, being relatively new to the team, my bucket of connectivity and who I can pull in, and I'm working with stuff with the Plant a Seed campaign with Slow Fish. There is so much rich material that I can share with donors and with potential sponsors and partners. So, but what I would say is don't, just say it's up to one person. I mean, I really do think fundraising is a team sport. And what this slide is about is, I'm not going to lie, it's uncomfortable. It's like, would you consider giving me, $50, $10,000, what might have you? Fundraising is you're asking something of somebody, something tangible. And again, it's really about building those relationships so that you can have those conversations. But this is something that was brought to my attention and shared with me several years ago in one of my jobs, is talking about the 3 C's: connectors, communicators, and closers. And literally, I mean, the connectors are somebody that has, they're well known in the community. A lot of people know them. You can go to them and you can say, hey, I'm really thinking about doing this. Who would be a good person to talk to? I think I spoke to this earlier. It's, never leave a conversation, always end a conversation, I should say, with who else do I need to talk to? These are the connectors. I mean, really think about it as in terms of a Rolodex. Communicators, we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling and why it's important, how we do that, and what those story contents should be as somebody that's going out and helping raise resources for your organization. These are folks that are these are the extroverts, in my opinion. They really have the gift of gab. They love telling a story. They're very engaging individuals. I mean, they'll go have coffee with anybody. And they love to do it. And then the closers, this is the hard one. This is all of these play into your fundraising success. But a closer is somebody that, can say, would you please consider a gift of, would you commit to, your investment will. And so, we can talk about the 3 C's, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of put a job description kind of behind them. So your connector is your matchmaker. Your communicators are your choir. I mean, they just amplify your voice. Your closer, it's that notary, the one that can really verify and say, yes, this is the real deal. We're ready to move forward with this. They verify that we're moving forward, if that makes sense. And the only other thing that I would say is that, again, because fundraising is a team sport, I mean, you can bring all kinds of different skill sets into an organization for that role. I can certainly share, my job description, other job descriptions. But I think the most important thing here is, do those four-legged sales calls, do those four-legged, donor visits, 2 people per team and no duplicates, because a connector, a communicator, and a closer are all going to bring a different perspective and kind of a listening, screening to any conversation. And I think, having those four-legged sales calls are really important, especially if you're going to make an ask or you're going to establish a relationship. So hopefully that got to some of what you're thinking and answer some of your questions, Shirley. Okay, great. Okay. Well, and part of fundraising, as with just, we were talking about storytelling in the last session. I mean, we're telling stories, and this is really the main vehicle on how you engage a donor. And it's, a donor, whether it's in kind, whether it's a volunteer board member, or it's literally a financial ask. I think the things that you want to have at the ready as leadership within your organization is, your involvement. Why are you involved in the organization in the first place? And why do you donate your talent, time, and/or money? I mean, it's really having a personal understanding of what has brought you to the table is super important. The other thing too is, like, from your personal perspective, I mean, we can talk about it at, we certainly have national messaging, you have chapter messaging, but, what is the need in the community for this work, for this program? How are we meeting that need? Who do we serve? What do we support? Why are we doing this? It's the "we believe" statement that, is coming out of the national or the international office. We believe we can do this. And it really is, it's kind of that like exuberance that is really important to bring to somebody that you're trying to engage and partner with within the organization. And then this is, a value proposition statement is sort of something that's a little bit more, we see it all the time in private industry, the private sector, but I think it's a really important statement that we need to have at the ready as nonprofits. We do X with Y so we can Z. And that is, I was thinking about different value proposition statements of some of the, industry, private sector industry leaders, but it really is, what are you doing? What are you doing it with? And as a result, this is what we can do. It's, again, it kind of ties back to the "we believe" statement. And then the other piece is, the thank you statement. Because of you, we can do X, Y, and Z. We can marry together all the elements of that proposition, that value proposition statement. I think that's super, super important. And what I will say, and again, in my experience, is that, I worked with a brand new startup organization several years ago around, it was food and education. And we took the opportunity and carved out a leadership workshop. We got our whole board together, and together we really worked on crafting these statements. And so it wasn't just my statement or a board member statement or a member of the leadership team statement. They became all of our statements, and we shared them. And it was really profound, and it was really powerful because, again, you never know who you're going to get in an elevator with. And I think it's important to have these at the ready. They need to be short. They need to be sweet. It's the elevator pitch, so to speak. But these statements are a really, really excellent way to bring in that partner, engage the donor, bring in the donor, because you're saying something about your work and you never know what's going to stick. So if anything, I would say if you haven't spent time on doing this sort of work, please do, because, you just never know. I literally had an opportunity yesterday to talk to somebody that I was like, oh, and it was about slow food. And I have a second job in a fabric shop, and somebody walked in and I was able to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I would really like to talk to you more about that. And I'm going to email them next week. So have these at the ready. These are just good little, it's your change purse, because you never know how you're going to engage. You're never going to know when you have the opportunity to do this. Okay. So any thoughts? Because now we're going to talk about the dreaded ask and what that looks like. So I'm going to open up anything in the chat, Dion, or anybody want to kind of throw anything out at me before we go to the next section?
I think this is a good transition, because in the chat we've been talking about that ask of like approaching groups or local organizations. So this is a good transition point.
Good. Okay. So this is something I really honestly can't remember who told me this, but it is something that has stuck with me and I carry with me all the time. And it's this old adage in fundraising: if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And what I will say is that throughout my career, probably many of you have had similar situations. You're in that position where you need something, and it's it's scary. And I've been in one of my previous positions, I was in charge of major gifts. So I was the individual that would go with a board member or somebody from my leadership team, and I would ask for significant dollars. This was around a capital campaign. I don't know if anybody's doing a capital campaign, but nonetheless, I bring this up because when you sit down with somebody and you say, would you consider giving our organization $100,000? I mean, I still sweat. When I think about it, and if I've ever put in that position. But what this is to say is that, people want to get involved. People want to hear your story. And if you're just outright asking, hey, I need $100,000, or I need $5,000, or I need a sponsorship for X or whatever, I mean, they're going to probably, like, their gut reaction, their gestalt is going to be like, oh, well, did you ever think about this? Or did you think about that? Or, why are you asking this? And what about this? So when you think about asking folks for resources, really think first about asking for their advice. It's a spot on way to engage donors, I promise. The other thing too that I will say is that, yeah, I mean, I think before you ask of anybody else, there are things that you should ask of yourself. And this is really important, because for fundraising to be successful, it also needs to be very transparent. So here are some things that I just put together to ask, first of all, high level, what is your capacity? As a slow food chapter leader, as a slow food chapter, what can you personally commit to in terms of time and energy? Because fundraising, not only is it a special skill set or a specific skill set, it's also a lot of maintenance, and it's also a lot about relationship building and retention. What can you allocate or delegate without any significant oversight? I mean, I think this is really important. This kind of speaks to the size of the gift, the size of the ask. So, think about that as well. Will success of additional resources, lead to, like, oh, now that I've got, a $50,000 grant, oh gosh, now I need X, Y, and Z. Is it additional staffing? Is it additional equipment? Is it additional space? Is it, match funding? And then the other one is, if I don't get this, I mean, is this going to, jeopardize critical resources? So I think with those last two, before you go out and make an ask, is make sure that you've got a backfill plan on both, if I'm successful, what will happen? If I'm not successful, what will happen? And what I will say to this is sometimes, success can eliminate as many options as failure, and failure can eliminate as many options as success. So it's just it's a two-edged sword for sure. and what do you truly want? I mean, what kind of partnership do you want beyond funding? I mean, yes, money helps everything, but do you want like mutual aid? Do you want collaboration? Do you want strategic, alignment? Do you want advice, like ongoing advice? Do you want volunteers? I mean, I think these are some of the things I think with volunteers. Think about this. There's a lot of organizations, I think banks in particular, because of some of their funding requirements and community investment requirements, they really do look for, and this is true with corporations as well, they really look for opportunities to place their employees out in the community because that's a win for them. And then the other thing too is just always asking yourself, do you want to like stomach that constructive criticism? Because I think you will get, I mean, if you're going to a funder on any level, you're going to get feedback, and you just need to be ready to like accept it. Sometimes it's not easy to, and I have found in some situations, you get that funding and you just realize like, oh boy, this is a complete disconnect because they don't understand my work. This is what I mean by the constructive criticism. So really make sure that when you're going into these relationships and you're going into these asks, that you are very articulate about the work that you're doing and how you're doing it. And the other thing too is that don't do mission shift. I mean, if you are passionate about your work, stick to your mission. Don't take money just because somebody wants to give you, tell you how it's supposed to be done. And then finally, again, what are your non-negotiables? I think this is really important. I mean, what are you going to do to stay at the table? If you're working on a program or an event or a campaign, what is it that's going to keep you engaged, and what are you willing to do? I mean, this is staff, this is funding, this is volunteers. What's going to make you walk away? Again, I think this ties back to, what funding is available. I mean, if you think you have a really good plan, you've got a really wonderful program, stick with your vision and your values and your mission, and don't drift off of that, because that's just going to diminish your opportunities for funding. And I love this. Brett from, I think it was Colorado, he mentioned this in the last session, is that they don't ask their producers to donate product. So what is it that you won't ask for? I mean, and this is more, what won't you ask of your volunteers? What won't you ask of your leadership? What won't you ask of your sponsors? And I think that was, I put that in as I was listening to Brian's session last. I think this is really important. Make sure you know what you're not going to ask for, because then you can confidently ask what you need for. And then are you ready and prepared to give constructive feedback? I think, this is that fundraising, that relationship building dynamic, is that, if you have a donor who's a true partner, it's a two-way dialogue. It's, hey, I know you want this, but it's not going to work for my organization. So don't be afraid to do that. And again, I think that really, differentiates the notion of fundraising from fundraising. Okay. Couple other things. This is a lot, but I just wanted to put it out there. It's a gift comparison chart for an annual gift and a major gift. And really, I'm not going to go through it all. You'll have access to the stack. It's a resource for you. But it really is, it's a different way, another resource to help you think about the different levels of gifts. And when you sit down and you look at these, it's going to kind of give you a glimpse into a donor's mindset, different strategies on how to ask for different types of gifts, and also in terms of what an annual gift versus a major gift might be used for moving forward. And yes, I do put this in at the top. I mean, an annual gift is kind of like the microwave. You key in a few numbers, and pretty much in a couple minutes, lunch is served. Major gifts, as you kind of up the scale, this, I would say, this is like more significant asks of individual donors. It might be a corporation, foundations, can kind of fall into this, but it's kind of like the crock pot. I mean, bottom line is that whatever the gift type or purpose, the relationship you build is the foundation for successful value-based fundraising. So I just wanted to put that in there. Again, look through it. You'll know where to find me if you have any questions, but I just kind of think this is a really nice sort of just kind of a side-by-side comparison when we think about fundraising and what we're asking for and how we ask for it and how it might be received by a potential donor. Any questions, or start talking about another type of ask? Dion, anything in the chat?
Nope, nothing in the chat.
Okay. So again, we talked about the different types of funding sources. There's a lot of them kind of have a structured and formal process. I would say, foundation grants certainly falls into that camp. We at Slow Food USA have a little bit of a, we're reaching out to all kinds of donors and sponsors all the time. And we have a little bit, for folks that don't, trying to think of a really good example, like a foundation, not a foundation, a corporation, like they're not a small business supporter. They might be a bigger organization, maybe a regional company. You really like the work that they're doing in your area. They don't have a foundation, but you'd really like to engage them as a partner in funding, maybe a sponsorship, for example. So this is kind of a structure. And again, we will have this in more detail. There's a lot of specificity and sort of structuring some questions around these types of pitches that we will have in the toolkit. But this is a process that we use with companies or funders that don't have a real formal structure or application process. Again, going back to Peggy Brannaman, my reference librarian, she is so great at finding the right person within the organization to find, who do I get in touch with? And I always say, start with email. I think we're just in this day and age of technology. I'm an old-fashioned person. Sometimes I'm willing to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I'm trying to get in touch with somebody. But really, the email contact, it's just that initial, I shouldn't say necessarily email, but that initial contact with somebody with a less formal process of, you're asking for funding from, is introduce yourself, your organization. What are you looking for? What is it that I want from you? I want a sponsorship. I am looking for an in-kind donation. I am looking for volunteers. The other piece to this is ask for a phone call. I mean, you really want to get somebody on the phone. If it's, email, phone, that's kind of the sequence. And if you can, this is an approach, kind of less is more. Just give them something, give them a visual. We have beautiful visuals. Again, going back to what Brian was talking about, we have information, we've got great graphics, we've got great logos, we have a lot of resource material for you to use, but just it's something, seeing is believing, and it really, if you've got a visual, it's a way to, again, quickly engage somebody like, oh, this looks interesting, I want to talk to that person, sort of thing. Okay. Congratulations, you got through to the right person and they want to talk to you. And one of the things that we do is I know because I'm working with Plant a Seed and with Slow Fish, is we have actually a menu of sort of ways to engage a potential sponsor. If you can, do that, send a very visual deck, but keep it simple. And then once you get that phone call, I always say lead off with a thank you. Thank you is such a powerful term. It's a type of acknowledgement. Discuss your alignment and explore the possibilities. And again, now it's your opportunity to say, hey, can I send you more detailed information so that they can take a deeper dive into it? The follow-up phone call, hopefully, there are some areas of interest on the part of the donor or the sponsor who might have it that might be a good fit. And the purpose of the second phone call is really to determine, what are the commitments and goals of both parties? Like where is truly that alignment? What is that going to look like? How is this going to play out? Is it like, outright cash? Is it in kind? Is it staffing, volunteers, that sort of thing? And again, we've got this, I'm working on this, and it'll be more specific and detailed as a resource. And then finally, I think next steps. I mean, this again, you've made the ask, you've gotten the commitment, you want to definitely do the paperwork. We use a memorandum of understanding with both parties. Everybody signs off on it. Make sure you get a payment schedule, you send an invoice, regular check-ins on the work that you're doing together, the work that's being supported by this sponsor or donor. This is both good and bad. And I really want to emphasize both good and bad. It is very important to let folks know if they're invested in you, if things aren't going so well, they might be able to help you with a course correction. And certainly if things are going great, celebrate that with them as well. And then just kind of the round out is that if this is a finite kind of partnership that it's going to last 3 months or whatever, do regular check-ins and make sure that, and when everything is said and done, that you sit down and you go like, what worked for you? What didn't work for you? I mean, things may seem like they're working right and there, but you know, as we get through a whole process, we might think, you know, maybe we should do this differently next year, or we want to do something in addition to what we did this year next year, and really make sure that you don't just let the, you know, this partnership just kind of come and go. Always look forward and always look to the next cycle. And again, this is another beautiful opportunity. It's like, okay, if this worked for you, any thoughts of who else we can bring into this partnership moving forward? You know, always ask who else needs to be at the table. Okay, any thoughts? Then I'm going to go into my last little bit before we talk about resources and wrap it up.
Nothing.
Stephanie
Oh.
raised her hand.
Gosh. Yes, Stephanie,
Go for it, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you. I was just curious. So any memorandum of understandings, do you ever experience any pushback from businesses, companies, not wanting to sign off? I'm just wondering, in my experience, anything that's in writing that indicates any kind of contractual obligation tends to, there's a little resistance to that. So I was just curious what your experience has been.
You know, and I might just lean in on Brian a little bit on this. I'll answer first. I think my experience, you know, it's a memorandum of understanding versus a contract. I think the contract is much more binding. A memorandum of understanding is like, we've had this conversation. Here's what we, you know, how we want to work together moving forward. This is what we hope to accomplish and achieve. But I think that, you know, even in my tenure with Slow Food and even past experience, a memorandum of understanding is just like, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And it's a good reference point to go back to. It's like, oh, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z, but you were only able to do X and Y. Is Z even possible? You know, that sort of thing. And I think that, yeah, I mean, that's why we say memorandum of understanding is really just to kind of document what it is that we discuss, so that moving forward, there aren't any surprises, but also if we do have a hiccup, we can kind of go, oh, whoops, we need to do a course correction, or we need to kind of rethink this. And can we, you know, can we turn left or can we turn right on this? That's kind of my thoughts. Brian, do you have anything to add? I mean, just because you've seen a lot of our MOUs that we have with folks.
Yeah, I don't. I think the only point I was going to make you just made, which is it's best to keep in consistent communication with a funder so that everyone's on the same page about what's going on. And yeah, to think of a course correction as a collaboration and an opportunity to educate the funder about the landscape and what's feasible and what's effective. So yeah, but I think you nailed it on the head, Patricia.
No, okay. Does that help, Stephanie? Yeah, and we can probably, you know, put some boilerplate language together, just kind of like the high, you know, kind of the buckets that we address in our MOU. Again, it's going to obviously be, you know, relationship specific, but I think, you know, to me, an MOU is like, yeah, we're all on the same sheet of music, versus a contract is like, we are contracted to do X, Y, and Z. It's less stressful, an MOU, but I think it's a very good practice to put in place. Anybody else? Okay. I'm gonna,
Yes,
continue on.
Shirley has her hand raised.
oh, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that you have all of the contacts that you mentioned. That I think they will work for most of the requests that a fundraiser, that a person might have, but in some cases, isn't it better to do it in person? In Las Vegas, we have a lot of huge casinos, and they get hundreds of requests, emails, phone calls, and so forth and so on. I would think that it would be better to find a person in that organization that deals with all those requests and talk to that person in person, if you can get an appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally an advocate for, I mean, I think personal touch is a really important thing, and to be able to sit down with somebody and, you know, have a cup of coffee, or just have even like, you know, a 15-minute, like, hey, I am so-and-so from this chapter, and this is what I'm looking for. And, you know, sometimes I mean, in Las Vegas, correct? I mean, there's, I mean, very big organizations, very big companies. Again, it's, you know, looking at those concentric circles, and who, you know, even if you start with the wrong person, you know, and you keep doing that, like, who else should I be talking to? Are you the right person to talk to? It's this sort of thing. Yeah, that can work, definitely. But I think just, you know, for the sake of time, you know, time is of the essence, and we only have so much of it. Sometimes an email is just, it's a great way to get through. And but yeah, we can talk about this a little bit more, maybe kind of strategize around that, but yeah, it's not always easy. I will just leave it at that. But email sometimes is just a great way to start, and hopefully that will carry you through.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so kind of the last piece of my presentation is giving good thanks. I think this is hugely, hugely important, and really, for, you know, my experience in giving good thanks is really understanding what the donor wants. What does the donor, I mean, if it's a corporate sponsor, if it's an individual, what is it that they're really looking for? And I think this is the piece. I mean, there's an acquisition side of fundraising, but there's also a retention side of fundraising. And I think where we retain our donors, we retain our partners, where we retain our sponsors, the people that really value our work, keep coming back and back and back, is because we've given them good thanks. And as you will see at the top of this little slide that I'm about to present, I said, there's no such thing as a potential donor. Anybody want to take a stab at why I'm saying that? And I have a really good explanation. I'd love to just take yourself off mute, put it in the chat. No? Okay. Well, a really good friend of mine and a colleague that I've known for, I'm old, 30 years, once said that the only way that you cannot be a donor to my organization is if I read your obituary or you've already made a gift. And if you've made a gift, you become a partner. And so I was like, wow, that was really, I mean, Peter Roth is my friend. And I thought about that, and it's very true. And I'm going to explain why. So again, giving good thanks is really understanding what the donor wants and what that communication is. And there's 4 pieces to this. So the first thing is a donor wants to be acknowledged. And this is a very direct, it's private, it's intimate, it's like a handwritten note, it's a phone call. You know, you don't acknowledge a donor just because they gave you a gift or they became a sponsor or they donated something to your auction. And when we talk about acknowledgement, when I think about acknowledgement, it's like, how do I acknowledge a donor? Say happy birthday if you can capture that information. Is it an anniversary? Is it a special occasion? Is it a life milestone? I mean, all of these things, I mean, this is a really great way to know who is in your circle. How do you build out those concentric circles? Yeah, I mean, I had the first time I asked for a major gift years and years ago. I remember that donor saying to me that she was about to become a first-time grandmother. And I said, oh, when is your baby's your grandbaby going to be due? And she told me, and, you know, I sent her a little handwritten note because I heard that her daughter had her baby. And we've been in touch for 15 years since then. And it's just a really fun way to celebrate people and just acknowledge them as individuals. So an acknowledgement, as I said, it's not the thank you for donation correspondence. Communication. I mean, this is huge. And communication, I think Brian will agree with me on this one. It's the provision of meaningful information. It's newsletters, it's report. It's the invitation to come see Slow Food in action in Las Vegas, or, you know, behind the scenes. It's, you know, again, if it's a donor, it's a phone call to say, hey, you know, we're doing really great on this. Not just like, oh, I've got a grant report due, but really, you know, taking the time to pick up the phone and saying, hey, we're doing really good. Or, oh boy, I could use your advice because we've had a hiccup. And the other thing I will say around communication, invitations to an event, it's informational, it's not meaningful. I had somebody come to me and ask me a question and said, you know, oh, I don't understand why I can't get this person to like engage in our work. I send them invitations to my events all the time. That's, you know, pick up the phone and call them and say, you know, come see this or be a volunteer, that sort of thing. So that's when we talk about communication, it's, you know, provision of meaningful information. And then there's recognition. And recognition is not acknowledgement. I think I just said that. I mean, recognition is, you know, that letter that you say, thank you very much for your donation. We're a 501c3 organization, you know, that sort of thing. And I think one thing around recognition, it's really important to be clear, both inside and outside of your organization, of what your recognition looks like. And this is another one of those things where you might want to kind of like talk about your non-negotiables. What do you want to do? Because, you know, sometimes, well, recognition is not a one size fits all. I mean, it can be very personal to a donor. And I think that there are donors, well, I know there's donors that don't want to be acknowledged, that don't want their name on your website or in your newsletter. So really be clear on how you recognize donors, at what level, how that feels. If you're getting into more significant asks, you know, it is absolutely appropriate to say to somebody, you know, how would you like to be recognized here? And again, think about, you know, what they want and how that would best fit into your organization. And then last but not least, and I think this is the most good thing that is probably going to surprise a lot of people, is donors want to be asked. They absolutely want to be asked. And that's why I mentioned this comment that my friend made about, you know, the only way you're not a donor is if I'm reading your obituary or you've already made a donation and then you become a partner. And I think that, you know, this is the hard part about fundraising. It's the hard part about going in front of somebody and saying, I really need, knowing that you have a need and you want them to support that need. And as I said it here, I mean, you'll never win the lottery. We've had some big lottery jackpots lately, but, you know, you're not going to win if you don't buy the ticket. And that ticket is the ask. And I mean, again, I want to go back and say, it's asking for advice. It's asking for their ideas. It's asking for a reference. It's just, and my favorite little trade secret trick sort of thing is if you have somebody in front of you that you really would like to engage in your organization and your work, don't ask them like for money, or don't ask them to volunteer. What I love to do is I said, hey, Paul, I've noticed you've come to a couple of our events. You're interested in this. So-and-so and so-and-so. Would you consider? And, just consider. And I think the best thing that I can say about that sort of framing is that you're not making a direct ask. You're not putting them on the spot for a decision. It's another way to engage them in conversation, but it's also a way for you to now know what your possibilities are. I mean, if you ask somebody, would you consider a donation? And they say no, well, maybe they're better fit for a volunteer, and a volunteer then can kind of become a donor. So just saying. So any last minute thoughts? We're getting up on the 90 minutes. And I want to just make sure that you know about some additional resources that I've put in the chat. These are some of my faves. I go to them all the time. I've got all these, the ones at the bottom here are resources, printed resources that are very dog-eared, but I go back to them over and over again. You have my contact information, and yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you for all hanging in, and Dion, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, if there are any last questions for Patricia, now would be the time. I appreciate all of the questions that have been asked so far. It was really helpful dialogue that took place. So going once, twice, and can we get the links from the last slide? Yeah, definitely. Here, let's we'll make sure, Patricia, if you could, we'll pull those links for you and make sure that you all get those. I will put on the leader resources on the website. Ideally, you also will have access to this presentation at the culmination of the Leader Summit too. The chat notes from the sessions, yes, we'll make sure you have access to that. And everyone's screenshotting, love that. Brian couldn't have said it any better. Happy Leader Summit to everybody. Thank you all for coming to not just this session, but a lot of the sessions, some of you, all of the sessions over this past weekend. I know it's a big ask to carve out more than a few hours of the weekend, and we couldn't be more thankful for it. So we'll all be in touch, the whole team. Thanks you all, not just for this weekend, but for all the slow food work that you do. And you can reach out to us at any time. We'll get back to you. And again, thanks for being here. Yeah, I think we did it, everybody. We had
Thank you.
Yeah. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.